Okay, in lesson 1.12, we're going to go through a little bit of a transition. In 111, we were focusing exclusively on the verbs, and there were images of nouns that appeared, which would represent new vocabulary. However, they were only there in order to provide context to help the student perceive the meaning of these new verbs. However, in lesson 1.12, it's completely the inverse. Now we're going to focus on the nouns, on learning the nouns. The students need to learn to use these nouns in order to complete their ideas, to express themselves in complete sentences. Because at the end of lesson 1.12, as you'll see, there is a place where the students are going to engage in extended discourse, where they talk about their own lives over a period of 90 seconds. And so they're going to need more than just the personal pronouns and the verbs. They'll need also the nouns to complete their ideas. And so that's the focus of 1.12. But before we get into the different sections of lesson 1.12, I want to take a look with you at the lesson plan for 1.12. We're going to click right here on the icon indicating the lesson plan. And I want to make sure you understand something which hopefully has become obvious to you up to this point in the school year. You see here it says at the end of the overview explaining what lesson 1.12 is about, we have details. Now details, whenever you see details, it means there's more information I want to provide you, but which would be much too lengthy to put into the lesson plan, which normally you'd want to be able to consult during the class period. And so I'll click on details here, and that takes me to a section entitled Making Daily Lesson Plans. Hopefully by now, I'm going to go back to the lesson plan itself, you've recognized that one lesson plan does not correspond to one day of class. It can't. I can't make a lesson plan corresponding to one day of your class because some of you meet with your students twice a week for 30 minutes. Others have more typically 50 or 55-minute periods. Some of you in block scheduling may have 2-hour-long classes, and therefore the lesson plans and one single day's class cannot line up necessarily. And so it's for you to make the determination how much material is reasonable to cover, how many of these activities can you actually perform in the course of a class. And so let me go back to the details, making daily lesson plans. And let me show you as you get down to the end here, as an example, therefore, of how one typical ULAT lesson plan might be broken up into class periods. Click on the words ULAT 1.12, that's the lesson we're currently discussing, to see how one ULAT lesson might be broken up into daily lesson plans. So it's going to open up, I clicked on it, it's going to open up for us a PowerPoint presentation in just a moment. Here it is. And within this PowerPoint presentation, you see some lines I've added to the screen. These lines indicate more or less if I were dealing with a typical 45, 50, 55-minute class period, how I might break the lesson up into individual days. Okay, so you see, first of all, the general breakdown of the lessons into segments that I think we could reasonably accomplish in the course of a 45, 50-minute class period. Here's day one, in which we first of all present the new vocabulary to the students after reviewing personal pronouns and after reviewing the verbs just learned. Now we're going to deal with the new vocabulary and an abbreviated drilling sequence related to that new vocabulary. Then on day two, we're getting ready for the students to give this extended discourse I talked about. And as they give a practice oral presentation where they talk with another classmate or conceivably with you in presenting themselves, and they're simply for practice sake, that one activity would not be sufficient to occupy an entire class period. And so very likely you'd want to go back and repeat step 3D from the first day's class, in which you're verifying whether or not the students have really mastered the grammatical structures, the verb conjugation, negation, question formation, or interrogation, which have been studied up to that point. Okay, so that's day two. And then on day three, if you feel the students are ready to give this extended discourse, give this talk about themselves for a period of 90 seconds, guided by images, which you'll see at the end of lesson 1.12, then you could go ahead and test them while assigning the remainder of the class the instructional video for lesson 1.14, the next lesson, to watch while students are being tested one-on-one. However, if you felt the students really weren't sufficiently prepared, another option for you to follow would be to give the students more opportunity to practice this self-presentation, this oral presentation, and then to move on to the next lesson, to introduce lesson 1.13, simply because they would not need the entire class period in which to practice the oral presentations. And so the key idea I'm trying to get across, really it's well expressed on the last screen here. It says, in any case, this sample lesson demonstrates the need for teachers to break down the ULAT lesson plans into segments corresponding to their class duration and their students' needs. You're not robots, you are rather artists, and you are masterfully choosing the activities and the schedule of activities which will best meet your students' needs and which best correspond to the duration of your class periods as well. So you have total freedom to take the ULAT activities and to organize them based upon your particular needs. Therefore, just understand that these ULAT lesson plans don't correspond one lesson plan to one day. They simply list the totality of exercises or activities to perform for each lesson. It's for you to determine how much you want to cover in the course of one class period. Let's quickly take a look through each of the different sections of lesson 1.12, and that would be it for today. First, the first section here, which contains the instructional video, you may or may not be choosing to have your students watch these videos. However, if this is your first year using the ULAT, I would highly encourage you to watch them, because you'll pick up a lot of techniques as to how to effectively use the ULAT lessons by watching how I teach a class, how I actually work with students. So I encourage you to be watching them to the degree that you have the time to do so. The second section here, you see the students are to perform a gesture and to say the word corresponding to these images right here. You'd be standing off to the side with a pointer, hopefully. You point at the image. The students in the class do this gesture and they say I or yo or je, whatever the language happens to be. And you try to go through this as quickly as you can. Section 3, you have a similar kind of activity where the students now have a mixture, or they're in different orders, the verbs and pronouns. However, you also have the timing element. And when you see a stopwatch timing, usually it suggests that competition of some kind at least could take place. Typically what I would do, I would break the class into two parts at this point. I would have one team go first, one group go first, and I would, using the stopwatch, time them, giving them 1 minute maximum to go as far as they can through this list of images. They would all speak at the same time. They'd say, live, make, do, you, watch. And as soon as I hear at least one student say the word clearly enough, I will go on with a pointer to the next image and have the students go through all of the sequence of images, hopefully in less than 1 minute, and stop the stopwatch, see how long it took that first group to go through. Then I give the second team the chance to do the same activity, but so that they aren't repeating the same sequence as the first team, I may have them start from the end and go to the beginning as I time them. Now, when a team wins a competition, typically what I do is I give the winning team 1 extra credit oral participation point. It's not a great deal, but it's enough of a stake that the students who by now understand the importance of oral participation they are motivated to try to win the competition. And competition is very helpful if it's not going to cause a student to be marginalized, an individual student to be marginalized. You got to find ways to work around a student being caused to feel ridiculous in any way. And so if it's a group activity, that's a little safer than individual activities when a student succeeds or fails. Next section. In this section here, actually two important points to make about the verb conjugation. Here you see all the new verbs: prepare, eat, like, watch, etc. Here you see their conjugations in the singular forms: I, you, he, she, and you, formal if that form exists in the language you're teaching. But notice that this section and the next section seem to be identical, and many ULAT lessons will have one section followed by another that seems to be identical. But always notice the symbolic direction. This one tells the students that they're simply to listen to each of the conjugations without saying anything the first time through. And you can determine based upon the language you're teaching whether or not the singular conjugations are difficult enough, the changes are radical enough from one form to the next, that it would be worth your while to use class time to have the students listen to each of these forms. That's up to you to determine. But in any case, in the second section, they're going to go ahead and they'll say the word, and then you'll click on the image so that they can verify whether or not what they said was correct. The second point I want to make about these two sections right here, the verb conjugation, is really, it goes back to what I was talking about in the first section about the instructional videos. If you watch the instructional videos, I don't have to explain to you what I'm about to say. You've seen me do this or use this technique. If you're not watching them, unfortunately, I've got to explain at this point this technique, but I won't go into great detail because I really want you to be watching these instructional videos. When I'm going through the conjugation of a verb with students, depending upon the degree of difficulty of the language that I'm teaching, I will, as you've seen me if you've watched the Spanish videos, I will do some kind of a manual activity, some kind of a gesture to represent the structural changes that are taking place, the transformations taking place when a verb is conjugated, or when a sentence is made negative, or when a sentence is turned into a question, a statement is turned into a question. And performing these kinesthetic activities and causing the students or requiring the students to do the same greatly enhances their retention of these structural elements and really gets across the transformations that are occurring in words without me having to explain rules to them. I don't have to tell them, well, in a negative sentence in French, you put ne before the verb and pas after. And if ne is followed by a verb starting with a vowel sound, you have to form a contract. No, I don't have to do that at all. The students, as they imitate these gestures I'm performing, as they watch me perform the gestures, they're learning grammar in a very indirect fashion that does not muddle their mind with a whole list of rules in their native language, by the way, which they must retain. And so, for example, I'm teaching Spanish, and I'm teaching verb conjugation. I associate yo, o, tú, s, él, ella, usted, and then it's not just that I perform these gestures for them, I have them imitate me, and then I'll drill them, I'll challenge them on occasion. I'll say to them, always in the target language, okay, ahora lo que voy a hacer, yo les voy a indicar el pronombre, quisiera que ustedes pues hagan el gesto, o, s, ch, que corresponde pues al pronombre que estoy empleando. Now, they don't know what I just said, all the words I just said. All they needed to hear was o, s, ch, and they already, I put it myself, and I indicated yo. I put it them, o, s, ch, and they understood. I was telling them that I wanted them to perform this manual activity, this manual gesture, this gesture here, corresponding to the verb conjugation. And they get the idea. And so I'll say, okay, ¿están listos? Que vamos, tú. And certain students will go, and I'll go, sí, muy bien, así es, muy bien, tus, okay, después. And notice what I'm doing right now. I'm kind of adapting the position of a football player who's getting ready for a football game. You try to get across a certain amount of intensity by your posture, by the expression on your face, and so on. So yo, and so the students have to try as quickly as possible to say oh and él, etc. I drill the students in that fashion so that they get a deep structural understanding of the transformation that occurs in words without me having to put it into English rules that they must retain. Okay, but all that I just explained to you right there was kind of unnecessary if you've been watching the instructional videos, seeing how I teach. I would encourage you to do that, just so I don't have to go on these lengthy explanations of things that you can see very well for yourself. Okay, next section. And yes, next section. Here in these sections, I'm presenting the different new vocabulary words, breakfast, lunch, dinner, for example. Then they have some statements which they have to try and make. Important point I want to make right here. I've made this point before, and so I'll try to make it quick, but it's very important. As you're reading through these statements to the students for the first time, before they've done independent study, before they've tried to participate in oral participation activities, when they're making the statements themselves as they read through the lesson. When I, as a teacher, am presenting this information to them for the first time, I've encouraged you in the past to take on the persona of a student. And once again, I want to make this real clear what I mean by it, but I don't want to take too long. You want to model for the students the thought process through which a student typically goes as they, through trial and error, try to come up with the right statement, the right response. But you want to model it in such a way that they finally arrive, or you finally arrive, at the thought process that you want as their final goal, the final product. What I mean by that is, I'll show you. I'll do this one in English, okay? This is statement number 1 here. This is I prepare breakfast. And so as a teacher, I'm going to think, okay, I'm going to act as I'm thinking really hard, as I'm struggling a little bit with the concepts in this that I must bear in mind as I'm making this statement right here. And I'll say, okay, I prepares breakfast. I prepares. No. He, she, I prepare. I prepare breakfast. In other words, I start to make this statement. I make a mistake, just like students are inevitably going to do. Then I stop. I think about what I've been taught in the past, that the ending for third person singular in English is the only one which has the ending to it. The third person singular with he or she has the at the end of the verb. The rest do not. Then I go back and I correct my mistake. So again, I make an effort at forming a statement. I make a mistake. I stop. I catch myself. I try and do this in such a fashion to make it as believable as I possibly can. You'll be amazed. You may think that students know you know this information. They know you're doing this on purpose. If you are expressive enough, students will get sucked in. They'll get sucked into what you're doing, and they'll go along with the thought process and the emotion related to your confusion. They'll go along with it. Just be as convincing as you possibly can. So you try to make a statement. You make a mistake which is typical of the kind of mistakes students make. Then you go back and you remind yourself of what you've been taught, the rule, but not in a stated declaration as far as the rule is concerned, but rather the rule represented by the gestures, by the kinesthetic representation of structural elements, structural transformations, and then you correct your statement. Okay, let me show you in Spanish what I do here. Or let's do this in French. Okay, this is, by the way, this is you don't prepare lunch. And so I'd say, okay, tu, non. Tu, ça c'est vous. Tu, vous, ok. Vous ne prépare le déjeuner. Oh non, c'est ne pas. Ah ouais, vous ne prépare pas le déjeuner. Oh non, c'est vous et. Vous ne préparez pas le déjeuner. So, again, you make an attempt, you make a few mistakes of the nature of the mistakes the students would typically make. You go back and remind yourself in a visual fashion of the rule governing these transformations in words, and then you rectify your statement. So you're simulating the thought process a student goes through, the effort, the thought, and then finally you're modeling the proper thought process for the student. Now you might not want to go through the reading through the entire lesson in that fashion for students. It might get a little tedious, much too lengthy, but a few examples could be very healthy for students. So that whole section right here, these sections, deal with the presentation, both the presentation really of new vocabulary and a reminder for the students of the types of statements, affirmative statements, questions, negative statements that the students thus far have learned to make. Well, we get down to here we have some drills that the students are to perform regarding the same kinds of statements, and I'm not going to, I guess I won't spend any more time there. Let's go to the last activity, which is dealing with extended discourse, when the students are going to speak for 1 minute and 30 seconds about themselves. Just a quick reminder, you give them 90 seconds to talk about themselves. It doesn't matter about which images they choose or they choose to speak. It does not matter in what order they choose to speak about them. All that matters is they keep talking for 90 seconds. And then if you want to understand how I personally evaluate speech, you've seen hopefully a presentation of this before, click right here on what normally is the grading key, and this will take you to, in just a moment, a lengthy explanation, as you can see right here, of how I evaluate oral presentations. and you can see the symbols that I use to transcribe speech, the value I give to each symbol, what rate of speed a student must attain, or how much information they must communicate to totally satisfy my expectations for them, how many points they lose for mistaken structural elements in their speech, and I think that's probably it, and then how I actually arrive at a score finally. All right, well, that's more than enough for lesson 1.12. I'll see you in lesson 1.13.